What would you do if a homeless veteran walked into your courtroom wearing pain instead of pride? That's the question Judge Frank Caprio faced one quiet morning in Providence, Rhode Island. The sun had barely risen when the first cases began. Most were simple: parking tickets, minor violations, the routine hum of daily justice. But that morning, something different happened. The courtroom door opened, and in walked a man whose face told 1,000 stories before he ever spoke a word. His coat was torn at the cuffs, his shoes frayed, his eyes tired but searching. He stood at the defendant's table, not with anger or arrogance, but with a quiet shame that made the entire room fall still. His name, the clerk read softly, was Michael Carter. And that name, unfamiliar to everyone there, would soon remind the world what real justice looks like. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Good morning, sir. How are you today?" Michael hesitated. "Trying, Your Honor," he replied, his tone low and uncertain. There was something in his voice that caught everyone's attention, something raw, something broken. The judge could see it immediately. That's where this story begins, not with a fine or a verdict, but with a look. The look of a man who had lost nearly everything, standing before another man who refused to see him as just another case. Frank Caprio had spent decades behind the bench, but he never let the bench define him. To millions around the world, he wasn't just the judge from Providence. He was the man who made compassion part of the courtroom. But before he became a symbol of empathy, he was simply Frank, the son of an immigrant fruit vendor who taught him that every person deserves to be treated with dignity. That morning, as the light filtered through the tall windows, Caprio's gavel rested quietly on the bench. He wasn't in a hurry. He never was. He listened, really listened, because he knew the courtroom was more than a place for rules. It was a place for stories, and every story had a heartbeat. The room smelled faintly of coffee and rain. A few people in the audience whispered, curious about the ragged man standing before the judge. But Caprio didn't see the torn jacket or the nervous hands. He saw something deeper, the kind of pain that hides behind politeness. "Mr. Carter," Caprio began softly, "I see here you've received a parking violation on Westminster Street. Do you remember that day?" Michael nodded. "Yes, sir. I was parked by the shelter. I didn't have anywhere else to go. I thought it would be okay." The judge leaned back. "You're living at the shelter?" Michael hesitated before answering. "When there's space, yes. Other nights, I just find a spot." No one in the room moved. The faint sound of rain against the windows filled the silence. The judge's eyes softened. "Mr. Carter, I notice your address here is blank." Michael looked down. "I don't have one anymore, sir." That's when something shifted. It was no longer about a ticket, it was about a man's life. The judge's questions became more personal, not prying, but compassionate. "Were you in the service, Mr. Carter?" Michael nodded. "Yes, sir. U.S. Army, Afghanistan." A ripple of recognition moved through the room. Caprio's tone changed instantly. "Thank you for your service," he said. "Can you tell me what happened after you came home?" Michael took a deep breath. "After I got back, things didn't go how I thought they would. Lost my job, lost my apartment. My head wasn't right. You start missing appointments, stop answering calls. Before you know it, you're invisible." Invisible. That word hung in the air like smoke. The judge clasped his hands and let the silence stretch just long enough for everyone to feel its weight. He had seen hundreds of cases, but this one cut differently. Maybe because he knew that some wounds aren't written on paper. They live in silence, in the space between sentences. As Michael spoke, fragments of his past painted the room. Nights on cold benches, friends lost to war and to time, the quiet guilt of survival. He hadn't come to court for pity, just for closure. But Judge Caprio sensed that the real verdict that day wasn't about guilt or innocence. It was about dignity. The judge leaned forward again. "Mr. Carter, I know that battle doesn't end when the uniform comes off, but you've shown up today, and that means something. That takes courage." Michael nodded faintly, his lips trembling. "Thank you, sir. I just wanted to do the right thing." The rising conflict wasn't about law anymore. It was about two kinds of justice, one written in codes and fines, and one written in compassion. Caprio understood both. He could see that Michael's war hadn't ended in Afghanistan. It had followed him home, unseen by most, but as real as any wound. "Tell me," Caprio said gently, "when was the last time you had a place to call your own?" Michael hesitated, then whispered, 3 years ago." A hush fell in the room. A woman in the back covered her mouth. Even the stenographer slowed her typing. Caprio's voice softened even more. "Do you have any family nearby?" Michael shook his head. "Not anymore, sir." The judge looked down at the citation in front of him. It was a single slip of paper, an ordinary parking ticket. But in that moment, it symbolized something much larger, a system that often forgets the stories behind its paperwork. Then came the moment no one expected. Judge Caprio stood up. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped down from the bench and walked toward Michael. You could hear the shuffle of his shoes on the courtroom floor, the creak of every step. The crowd held its breath. He stopped just a few feet from the veteran and looked him in the eye. "Mr. Carter, I want you to know something. My father once told me that the true measure of a person isn't how they treat those above them, but how they treat those who have fallen. You have fallen, son, but you haven't failed." Michael's chin trembled, his eyes glistened, and his lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Caprio placed a hand on his shoulder. "You fought for this country. Now let this country fight for you." The room was silent. A single tear rolled down Michael's cheek. The judge continued, his own voice thick with emotion. "I grew up in a poor neighborhood. My father used to sell fruit from a wagon. He told me, 'Frank, never look down on anyone unless you're helping them up.' I never forgot that. And today, I think he'd be proud." Michael swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "I don't deserve this kindness." Caprio shook his head. "You deserve more than this, Mr. Carter. You deserve a chance to start again." Then came the decision that would echo far beyond that courtroom. "Mr. Carter, your citation is dismissed. But that's not all. We're going to make sure you get the help you need." He turned to one of the court officers. "Officer Daniels, contact the Veterans Outreach Center. Tell them I have someone who's ready for a new beginning." The officer nodded, already reaching for his phone. The judge looked back at Michael. "You've spent enough nights in the cold. Let's get you somewhere warm." Michael covered his face with both hands, his voice shaking. "Sir, I don't know what to say." The judge smiled. "You don't have to say anything. Just promise me you'll keep going." And then, for the first time that day, Michael smiled. It was small, uncertain, but real. The people in the gallery began to clap, softly at first, then louder. A courtroom built for judgment had become a sanctuary of grace. As Michael turned to leave, Judge Caprio said, "Take care of yourself, soldier." Michael stopped, turned, and saluted. "Thank you, sir, for seeing me." The judge nodded, his eyes glistening.
always. When Michael Carter walked out of that courtroom, something within him had shifted. The same man who had walked in carrying years of pain now carried something far lighter: the weight of being seen.
Friends, that's the power of one act of kindness. It doesn't erase the scars, but it reminds us that healing is still possible. Judge Caprio didn't rewrite the law that day. He rewrote a life. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. Michael lifted his head, feeling the light on his face. For the first time in years, he believed in tomorrow. Inside, Judge Caprio whispered under his breath, "Thank you, Dad," and tapped his gavel, not to end something, but to begin something new. Friends, imagine if we treated every stranger with that same compassion. How many lives could we change with a single act of mercy? If this story touched your heart, share it. Let it remind us all that the smallest kindness can become someone's turning point. And tell us in the comments, have you ever witnessed a moment that restored your faith in humanity? Because kindness spreads like light, and today you've seen what one spark can do. But this isn't the end, because the very next week, another visitor entered Judge Caprio's courtroom, and what he said left everyone speechless. That morning, the courtroom felt different. Maybe it was because of what had happened just days before. The story of the homeless veteran still lingered in the air like a sacred echo. People walked in softer, spoke quieter, as if they knew this place wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about humanity. The clerk shuffled through papers as the next case was called. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses, unaware that, once again, the day would bring something unforgettable. The door opened, and in walked a man in his 30s. Clean clothes, steady eyes, but something about him carried weight. He walked with the cautious confidence of someone who'd practiced strength just to keep from breaking. "Good morning," Judge Caprio greeted, his voice steady, kind. "What's your name, sir?" The man cleared his throat. "Daniel Ruiz, Your Honor." He wasn't here for a major offense, just another minor violation. But as soon as he began to speak, the same stillness filled the room that had fallen when Michael Carter had stood there a week before. There was a story hidden behind this man, too. You could feel it before he even began. Daniel explained his citation quickly, his tone controlled. But then, unexpectedly, he looked up at the judge and said, "Sir, I watched what you did last week with the veteran. I was there, sitting right over there." He pointed to a bench in the back. Caprio paused, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. Daniel continued, his voice trembling slightly. "That moment changed me. I realized maybe not all hope is lost. That same day, I called my mother, for the first time in years, and I told her I was trying again." Caprio's expression turned warm, deeply moved. "Mr. Ruiz, you don't know how much that means to me." Daniel nodded, fighting emotion. "I just wanted to come here and say thank you. You didn't just help that veteran. You helped me too. I'm standing here because of what I saw you do." A wave of quiet awe swept through the room. Even those who'd come for routine cases felt something stir within them. Judge Caprio leaned back slowly, the corners of his mouth lifting in a small smile. "You see, Mr. Ruiz, that's the thing about kindness. It doesn't stop where you send it. It keeps traveling." The gavel tapped lightly on the bench. He said, "Your case is dismissed, sir. But more importantly, I want you to know I'm proud of you. Keep that momentum going. Keep paying it forward." Daniel's voice cracked as he said, "I will, Your Honor. I promise." When he walked out, there was no applause this time, just silence. But it wasn't the silence of restraint. It was reverence. Everyone understood that they had just witnessed the ripple of something rare. One act of kindness, creating another, and another still. Judge Caprio exhaled deeply. "It's a good day to believe in people again," he murmured. And that's what makes these stories endure. Because somewhere between the rules and the rulings, between the sentences and the silences, humanity finds a way to speak. 1 week earlier, a veteran had found hope. This week, a stranger found courage. And next time, well, who knows? Maybe the next person to walk through that door will remind the world, once again, that kindness is contagious. Because kindness doesn't end when the gavel falls. It begins there. That afternoon, long after the last case had been heard and the courtroom stood empty, Judge Caprio remained seated at his bench. The late sun poured through the tall windows, painting gold stripes across the floor. Papers were scattered before him, but he wasn't reading them. He was thinking. Thinking about Michael Carter, about Daniel Ruiz, and about how two lives, both battered in different ways, had found their way into his courtroom and somehow into each other's stories. He thought of how Michael's trembling voice had filled the room, how Daniel's words, a week later, had echoed that same fragile courage. Two men who had every reason to give up, but didn't. Caprio took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Maybe that's the real work, he whispered to himself. Not the verdicts, but the moments between them. In the quiet, he remembered his father again, the old fruit vendor who taught him more about life than any law book ever could. He could still hear the man's gravelly voice saying, "Frankie, don't ever let the law make you forget the people." He smiled softly. "I haven't, Dad, I promise." Down the hall, a janitor pushed his mop, humming an old tune. The courthouse, which by day echoed with arguments and rulings, now felt peaceful, almost like a church after the congregation had gone home. Judge Caprio stood and walked toward the exit, stopping by the same bench where Daniel had said he once sat, ready to give up. The seat was empty now, but Caprio looked at it with a quiet reverence, as if it held something sacred. That's when Officer Daniels appeared from the corridor, his phone in hand. "Judge, you'll want to hear this," he said. Caprio turned, curious. "What is it, officer?" Daniels smiled. "Just got a call from the Veterans Outreach Center. Michael Carter's doing good. He's got a room, regular meals, and they're helping him with a job application at a mechanic shop. He said to tell you, thank you." Caprio's eyes glistened. "That's the best verdict of the day." Daniels nodded. "He said something else, too." "What's that?" "He said he wants to come back one day to thank you in person." The judge nodded, emotion swelling in his chest. "Tell him he's welcome anytime." As Daniels walked away, Caprio looked once more at the bench, the quiet walls, the faint echo of stories that would linger long after he was gone. Then he said softly, "You never know who's listening." The next morning, the courthouse doors opened again, as they always did. People came with citations, fines, disputes, each one carrying their own invisible story. But what no one knew was that among the faces in the back of the courtroom, Michael Carter had returned. He wasn't there as a defendant this time. He was there as a man beginning again. Clean clothes, clear eyes, a small American flag pin on his chest. He sat quietly, watching the proceedings, smiling faintly as Judge Caprio greeted each person with that same gentle warmth. To anyone else, he was just another spectator. But to him, that courtroom was where his life had started over.
When the judge noticed him, their eyes met briefly. Caprio didn't say a word. He just nodded, once, knowingly. Michael nodded back, a silent promise exchanged between two men who understood what it meant to be seen. As the next case began, Caprio lifted his gavel and said, "Let's begin." But this time, there was something different in his tone, a hint of pride, a note of gratitude. Because behind every case was a reminder, every stranger could be a story waiting for grace. Outside, the city moved on, cars, conversations, lives colliding and crossing paths. Most people would never know what had happened inside that small Rhode Island courtroom, but those who were there would never forget. One act of kindness had changed one man's life, and that man's recovery had changed another. The ripple continued, quietly, endlessly. And somewhere out there, another person was waking up, lost, afraid, believing no one cared. But soon, they would walk through those same courtroom doors. And once again, Judge Frank Caprio would look up, smile, and say the words that have changed more lives than any ruling ever could. "Good morning. How are you today?" Because for him, every case was more than a number. Every person was a chance to remind the world that justice without compassion isn't justice at all. And so the story continues.